All right, so here's the video for how to build your own AI-powered patient. It's called the Clinical Scenario Chatbot, and it includes feedback. And so we're going to start. So we're using the AI MicroApps repository. If you need to learn more about how to get started with that, you can go to appsforeducation.ai, and the repository is free. It's open source. It's MIT licensed. You can start working with that. So I have on the left, if you don't know what this scenario does, another video that just demonstrates what this is, but essentially it's a patient that's coming to a doctor's office, and you can ask the patient things like, tell me about your symptoms. And the patient has kind of the background information. We're going to see how to add that. And you can have this back and forth conversation. There's a diagnosis, and then you get feedback on how you went through that scenario. So that's what the app does. Let's take a look at how to build it. So I'm actually going to clear everything out here and just leave a few things. And I'll set it to always rerun so that any changes we make are going to be reflected. So now we have just a few things. We just have a title. Our app title is Clinical Chatbot, an introduction, how it works, and then a fairly simple system prompt. It just says you're an assistant for a clinical simulation exercise for a student who's playing the role of a doctor. And you answer the user's questions. Now, interestingly, this is not the role of Donna, who's a big part of this simulation. This is kind of the overall wrapper. So we'll see how to prompt Donna into this. Okay, so let's introduce Donna, and the way that we start doing that is we add our first phase. And in our first phase, we've got to close a bracket here. In our first phase, we've got our old conversation in there. Let's get that. Okay, there we go. So in our first phase, we have a few things. We have intro text, which is this mark down here. It just introduces who Donna is and the fact that we have 15 minutes to interview her, which we're simulating by 10 questions. We have just a display image, doesn't do anything. So we have this decorative true setting, which means just display the image. We're not actually reading the image with AI. And then a chat input. So this is our chat box. We have the very typical, everyone's kind of familiar with it at this point, AI chat. And you have 10 messages. So we have this max messages here. And at this point, if I try to ask something, hi, what is your name? Donna has no idea, because we haven't added that background yet. So let's add that background now. So I'm going to pull in some copy and pasted text. Let's see if I got my brackets right. Looks like I might have. Let's see if Donna knows her name now. She does. Okay. And so what we've done is we have a fairly long set of phase instructions here. So here's where we are giving kind of a second system prompt. So up here we have generic, you're an assistant for a clinical simulation. And then in this particular phase, we're having this chat, we're asking the AI to play the role of this 65-year-old woman named Donna. And we're giving the information about that role. So name, age, gender, chief complaint. And this is all the things that we think might be relevant for this particular case study. So their medical history, their family's medical history. And it's all just natural language. There's no special coding in here. You could put this in kind of in any way you want. The AI is obviously pretty good at figuring out what the information is saying and then how to speak, I suppose, that information as Donna. So there's a lot of things that we could ask questions about. Their cough, their fatigue, chest discomfort. We could add more to this, right? Like this is we have a few things here. There's obviously more that you could ask as a patient. What happens if we ask something that's not in the information? Like, have you traveled recently? And they say no because they have no information about that. So still kind of stays in character, but doesn't have the information. So I'm not going to give the information. There's another thing that's happening here. So we are doing this chat. And then when we end the chat itself is kind of like an input, kind of like how we'd ask a question. We just have this chat. And so what happens when you end the chat is you end the phase and the AI reads anything that was said, just like it would read any input. So it's reading that chat. And I'm asking the AI to give feedback. So I'm saying from the chat, provide feedback on the following, whether the doctor is asking appropriate questions, whether the doctor has an appropriate bedside manner, and whether the doctor is staying on topic. And so it does that here. Actually, yeah. Interestingly, I missed some important questions. So smoking history was very important. So it's telling me actually that it did that. And it looks like it's recognizing a calm tone. That's fine. And it's, in very nice ways, I think, admonishing me for not asking about her symptoms, given her respiratory concerns. And it says over ECM because that's the last thing that we've added so far. So the next thing we want is we want to have an assessment stage, kind of a diagnosis stage. So after the conversation, we're going to add a input for a diagnosis. And I have to close that bracket. I'm just going to go ahead and end this chat with nothing in there. And I don't know what this is saying because I haven't asked anything. But over in my code here, what I've asked for is two fields. One is a field for the primary complaint. So that's one text input where the user just enters what is the user's primary complaint. The second is a long text area for a differential diagnosis. And when you ask for a differential diagnosis, what you're asking for is a list of potential diagnoses and evidence for those diagnoses and additional tests that you're going to want to run to kind of rule diagnoses as more or less likely. So I haven't added that yet. I've just added these input fields. If I submitted, I'm not going to submit it. If I submitted, it wouldn't give me anything very sensical. So I still need to add phase instructions in here, the instructions for what to do with this information. So let me add those now. Let's get to the bottom again. And let me explain these before I show it to you. So the phase instructions, we're saying the user is going to provide you with the patient's primary complaint and their differential diagnosis, and you're going to provide feedback on the accuracy of their claims based on the evidence they've gathered in the conversation. So one of the things that we want with this particular app is we want to make sure the student isn't just guessing and checking or knows the answer. We want them to actually have that conversation, and the AI can read that conversation and give feedback based on what the doctor discovered, what the user discovered during that conversation. So, and we tell the AI what are the potentials for likely diagnoses. So there's COPD, congestive heart failure, lung cancer, et cetera, and then potential for further evaluations, imaging tests, PFT tests, and then we input so the user prompt is what the user then says. So Donna's primary complaint is, take the value from here, and I believe her diagnosis is, take the value from here. And then finally, last thing is that we are scoring it. So again, this is a human readable rubric, and we're just checking whether or not they provided a primary complaint that is consistent with Donna's presentation and that they've extracted from the chat with Donna. And two, the differential diagnosis, they provided a valid differential diagnosis that's consistent with Donna's presentation and that they've extracted from the chat with Donna. And so let's finish this. So the primary complaint is simple. It's breathing issues, or let's say trouble breathing, and differential diagnosis. I'll put in a couple that I know are potentially factors, COPD, lung cancer, and one that I know the AI, that it's not actually a factor. Even though we are talking about breathing, it's not likely that she has asthma. Okay, so it's giving me feedback on these. COPD, yes, it's likely. Lung cancer, probably not the most likely cause, but it's good to keep it in mind. And then asthma, essentially, maybe an inhaler is good, but it is essential to distinguish it from COPD. I've seen other answers where it says asthma usually occurs earlier in life. One thing that it didn't catch here that I might try to prompt into it a little better is it didn't actually, catch the fact that we didn't have a conversation with Donna. And I think we could get that with better prompting. It did just kind of give us feedback on our primary complaint and differential diagnosis. And that's the configuration. There's a couple other things here. We're using GPT-4 Omni. I think 4.0 Mini is not quite enough for this kind of interaction. And that's mostly it. I hid the sidebar state, but if you wanted to bring it back and kind of play with settings and things, we could switch around models. The temperature is probably not going to do much for us here. You can look at the chat history, figure out how much this costs. So this interaction costs about a penny, but we didn't have this, we didn't have this conversation with her. Usually when you have the full conversation, this interaction costs about 3 pennies. So 3 pennies to get this, I think fairly valuable simulation experience. Not the same as a real patient or an actor patient, but it is the kind of practice that I think can be valuable and where we can get the voice of the instructor what kind of feedback they want their student to hear as they go through these. You can modify that, again, in different kinds of scenarios, maybe for beginner students versus later students. So I really like putting this one together, and hopefully now you have a better idea of how to put one of these together yourself.